He, nonetheless, we think was biomechanically very well built, like a brick house. So this man would have been, his pelvis was wide, his femurs are just very robust. He reflects the muscle attachment sites of someone who has marched for thousands of miles and probably was selected for his imposing physique. So he was definitely an imposing figure on the battlefield.
You are listening to History Man, where we walk in the footsteps of heroes and proclaim freedom reigns. On today's episode, we are at the Camden Visitor Center in Camden, South Carolina, recording a 3-part series sponsored by the Camden Visitor Center and the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust. The panel discussion surrounding the discovery and examinations of the soldiers found at the Battle of Camden site reveal much about that revolutionary battle, the soldiers, and their sacrifices. In this episode, we will hear from Dr. Bill Stevens and Dr. Maddie Atwell on the forensic anthropology.
It's such an honor to be involved in this project, and though Jim talks us up a lot, this was an amazing collaborative team effort of so many eager and expert individuals. It was really awesome to be involved. Maddie and I are going to present the preliminary results of the study of the human remains of the soldiers at Camden, the bioarchaeology. We've chosen not to show too many images of the bodies, of the bones, and we've converted some to sort of line drawings, just out of respect for their identity and the fact that they fought and died that day. So we're going to tell you where we are with the studies so far, and then lead into what could take place in future understandings of the lives of these men.
All right, so back in the fall, Bill and I were invited, much to our excitement, to participate in the bioarchaeology of the burials at the Battle of Camden. So bioarchaeology, simplified, is the study of human remains in an archaeological context in order to elucidate and gain insight into past life. So in the case of these burials, we were tasked with figuring out, first to exhume them and figuring out more about their lived experiences, as well as potential insight into their deaths. Many of you have been curious about us, why coroners were involved. Foremost, Bill and I are broadly bioarchaeologists, biological anthropologists, so trained in the study of the human skeleton and skeletal anatomy, as well as analyses involved in the study of such. Particularly with me, I have worked not only in archaeological contexts, such as the Battle of Camden, but also in anatomical collections, where people were medically dissected and placed into museum collections for the purposes of comparative study, in places like the Smithsonian as well as the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, where both places I've largely conducted work. So it was such a privilege to get back in the field and be a part of this, and not just our everyday work, which is contemporary medical legal death investigation, where we assist in the recovery of human remains in contemporary settings, identification, as well as in certain cases help forensic pathologists with cause of death.
Okay, so my training at University of Georgia consisted of what? Too loud?
No, they were like University of Georgia 8.
Oh, yay, go dogs. But then I went to USC for grad school, so. Consisted of getting involved in conflict context, war, genocide context from the start. So our professors took us to Guatemala to assist in training a team to recover the remains from mass graves of victims of genocide from the 1970s and 80s Mayan populations. So we got into some grim stuff starting out, but it has certainly taught me a lot in preparing for types of projects like this, where we're looking at the results of conflict between groups. I've also worked for the UN in Cyprus, where part of recovery and reconciliation between the Greeks and Turks is recover the remains, identify them, and return them to their loved ones. So that's a background for both of us that made us appeal to Jim and Steve and the like for being involved in the project. And we have a good relationship with them for other projects, and we always answer when they call, and they're super to work with. So we developed a protocol for the field. So as biological anthropologists, we're interested in cause of death, traumatic injury, identification of a person. We're not interested in just the artifacts. Though we do have archaeological training, we wanted to ensure that there's a history of metal detection out here, finding an artifact and digging it up. What does that do to a skeleton? It damages it, especially the sensitive parts we want to look at to learn about individuals. So we developed a protocol in the field of being able to link artifacts with elements, bones of the skeleton, preserve that association, lift them in blocks of sand, transport them carefully arranged. Jim mentioned how fragile, friable, and degraded they are. So if you don't maintain anatomical order, you could lose it. If they're just brought to us by archaeologists, unlabeled, not that they would have been, but we wouldn't know how to put these individuals back together. The soldiers need to be put back together, separated from each other. One individual, if they're 5 in a grave, overlapping, can be extremely complicated. We are tasked with determining minimum number of individuals. A lot of conflict situations involve mass graves and commingled remains where we don't know the exact number. Maybe they are a secondary deposit, decomposed bodies on the surface of the ground, buried after the fact and jumbled together. That was the case in a lot of areas of the world with conflict and war. But here, we had some complicated scenarios that Maddie will talk about. We made a lot of diagrams in the field, a lot of measurements, and pondered these associations of 5 individuals buried together to ensure that we had each individual and the correct arm with the correct individual. We look at things like the size of the bones, the articulations, the joints, and we're able to hopefully match up and determine every part of an individual. So those are some field sketches we used. They look kind of primitive, but they're all parts of the putting our brains together and really assessing the nature of the deposit and the associated musket balls, buttons, everything we find there. Jen described transport with respect, recovery from the field in order to go to the laboratory. And it was an honor to work with the veterans on the team and to carefully transport them back to the office for the cleaning and lab work that did ensue.
So we concluded field work on November 8th, and very literally the next day, November 9th, we were in our lab. And we were fortunate to have continued use and hangout sessions with our friends from SKIA, archaeology friends, and Department of Natural Resources to continue helping us in this really large effort. When we got into the lab, we had to take a few days to figure out what we were going to do next. We had at that point developed a really good method out in the field, and none of us had done tackled a project at this level with this many individuals who, in many cases, like Bill described, were still encased in soil matrices to protect them from damaging them in the field. So it took us a few days, and we got organized and made this binder with inventory sheets and things like that. Every individual was exhumed and carefully wrapped in foil and placed on trays. A person took up about 6 to 10 trays, so it was no small feat with an organization and a limited lab space. But we made it work quite well. And after we got our organization straight, we began the process of x-raying, which is the top photo. We have a mini x-ray machine at our coroner's office that has proved useful for many things. And the bottom image shows the cleaning process. So the soil matrix needed to come off after the bone had been x-rayed, which the next slide shows you how critical that was for certain surprise findings. And then we would photograph them before and after, so while they were still in soil and then later when we got to deeper analyses. So this process was painstaking and meticulous and had to be. It was very much important to take great care, particularly because these individuals, as everyone at this table has already said, very fragmented and fragile. They're 240-plus-year-old remains. So we were fortunate through our archaeology friend, John Fisher, who's in this room with us. He has a friend at the Warren Lash Lab, affiliated with Clemson and down in Charleston, that worked with the Hunley sub, and Joanna Rivera, and she is a conservator, and she came up to Columbia and gave us her time to teach us a little bit about conserving some of the remains. Some of the cortical surface of the bone, so the outer layer of the bone, was, once it had been exposed, no longer underground, had contact with oxygen, and became even more fragile. And for two people who work with human remains, often this is nerve-wracking for us, and so it was very important to have someone help us with the conservation aspect. This is some of the surprise that we had, and these are examples of artifacts that we found while X-raying. These don't look like bones, because at this point, this is when the remains were still encased in soil. So one image shows uniform buttons showing shanks next to an arm. Really cool to see that before. We saw examples of buttons in the field, plenty of them, but this was really neat to see before it had even really seen the light of day, since it was still encased in soil. And the other one is the neck area, again showing additional buttons. After the holidays, beginning in January, it was just the anthropology team. So me and Bill and our colleague and friend Rachel Baker, who helped us in this process immensely. At this point, all of the remains had been unfoiled and meticulously cleaned and dried, and so it was time for us to anatomically lay the skeleton out from head to toe. To begin our process of data collection, and this is much like we do during forensic analyses as well. So we created a biological profile, which I'll explain more on the next slide, and go through with each individual from each burial. And start doing our metric and non-metric assessments, so general bone measurements and scoring techniques that are established in our field to gain better insight into things like stature, as well as age estimations and disease, trauma, these sorts of things. And again, you'll notice a theme, photographing and x-raying everything along the way. So biological profile is very standard, and the first thing that we tackle for a forensic case of an unidentified individual. So in the case of the burials from the Battle of Camden, every single person. So we estimated their biological sex using skeletal indicators that I'll explain, age at death, how old were these individuals when they died, their stature estimate or their living height, an ancestry estimate, and any sort of unique physical characteristic. We've gotten many questions and amazement and how much you can glean from the human skeleton, which is why I got involved in this field early on in college, because it's just fascinating to be able to know so much about a person by just their bones. So we have age estimations for these individuals. You'll notice some of them are kind of broad categories. The adults are broader than the juveniles for reasons that I will explain. These individuals, again, were very fragmented, and the methods that we employed varied due to these preservation limitations. The biggest and most important skeletal indicators, which Bill and I held out deep hope for with every excavation, are two indicators found on the pelvis, the front as well as the back. And these are non-weight-bearing joints, the surfaces degenerate pretty uniformly over one's life course, and thus make them a really great area of the body to estimate age at death. We only had one pubic symphysis for one person, and so, but really every time we really did hold out hope. So we employed multiple methods, which is a good idea no matter what. So we employed cranial suture closure, so looking at the different bones involved in the skull and how they fuse together and obliterate over time, these suture lines, as well as dental occlusal wear, which are the two lower images, one showing the method itself and one showing some of the mandibular molars from the individual burial 12. And this is the chewing surface of your tooth and how it wears over time. And there are standards and methods to refer to look at age based upon this occlusal wear. So the age at death estimations for the subadults, so people below the age of 20, of which we had 5 of the 14 individuals, which may come as a surprise. It was a big surprise to us as well. It's easier to predict more precise ages for these individuals due to the predictability of growth and development. So the X-ray image is not from one of our individuals, but it is an example to show you these growth plates. You can see the line, this is the knee joint, so your lower femur and the upper part of your tibia, showing growth lines. And in the field, we noticed for burial 13 that there were some extra bone, and immediately realized this is an unfused growth plate. So we knew at the time that these were teenagers, and when we got back into the lab, we're better equipped to estimate their ages more accurately. So these individuals, the teenagers, ranged in age from 15 to 19 years of age. And again, the 9 adults, you'll see broader age ranges over the age of 20. Some have a little bit more precision, 20 to 35, but there are broader age ranges, and I want you to know it's due to the limitations based upon the preservation. Another part of the biological profile is stature estimation. People were particularly curious about the Highlander's height, and he was a tall, burly man. And come to find out, he wasn't particularly tall, but I'm sure he was burly. In fact, we know he was burly, but I'll give that to Bill. In the case of these individuals, we used the maximum length of the femur, so the thigh bone, to measure, based upon an established formula in our field, to estimate the living height of individuals. For us, the mean stature of all of these, which we could measure 12 of the 14 due to preservation, they were about 5'7", and the graph shows you the differences. We had an individual that was as small as 5'2", that was one of our teenagers, so he wasn't done growing yet. And burial 12, he was 5'11", around 5'11", so he's quite tall. Other bioarchaeological research into Revolutionary War sites, which is few and far between, actually found the same mean stature, so the same average height, which was neat to see.
All right, during our analysis, we wanted to also assess indicators of the health of these individuals: disease, pathology, injury. We've found pretty ubiquitous and common among 19th century, 18th century skeletons is the indicators in the bones and teeth that show when someone was subjected to nutritional stress, maybe malnutrition, fevers, febrile illness as a child. When they're growing and developing, they preserve as lines on your teeth and bones of growth disruption. So you can see where they stop growing because they're fighting an infection, they're facing health challenge, and then they resume growing and a permanent mark is preserved. So throughout the teeth of most of the individuals, we saw enamel defects that are common. That tell us, and we measured them, we know about the time they occurred during development, and they varied, but they reflect the disease environment and the nutrition that these developing individuals faced. So oral health also, by and large, I've looked at Civil War soldiers. By and large, these guys they were a young sample of individuals, but they had better teeth. So pre-sugar, there's not a lot of carbohydrates and sugar involved. They weren't getting that. They don't have the level of cavities that we see among 19th century and modern individuals, and no overt signs of infection of the gums. A few of the older individuals have lost teeth during life and showed the closing and remodeling of the bone of the jaw when they lose their teeth and those sockets heal up. We also wanted to look at traumatic injury, of course, in the battlefield context, and anything that suggests what led to these men's unfortunate death. I put the Highlander here, so a Scotsman smoking a pipe. So with the dental health, these guys had crowded dentition, malocclusion, rotated teeth. They had all the things that occurred pre-dentistry, crowded mouths full of teeth. So they also ground their teeth. When looking at these age estimates that Maddie described, we're comparing with published standards from different times in history, but these guys probably ate a diet including stone ground, cornmeal and flour, etc., that would have worn their teeth down at much greater or much earlier decades in life than we face these days. Military requirements, we are aware of published military requirements for having anterior teeth for the purpose of biting paper cartridges, etc. So we don't know exactly, I don't, maybe Jim does, what those were, and Steve, back then, but these guys also could potentially show us occupational indicators, so use of the teeth as a tool, right? Holding a nail as a carpenter in your teeth. Chose the Scottish man with the pipe because the 71st Highlander has a oval facet in his canine, maxillary canine, which is consistent with holding that pipe habitually, that clay pipe in his mouth. We also conjecture that a lot of the grinding in offset patterns in the mouth is the result of combat stress. People are very stressed out. I ground my teeth a lot in graduate school. I cannot imagine being in combat and what that could produce. But okay, so we knew there would be gunshot trauma. We have very large caliber soft lead musket balls flying all around. We have the evidence for them in the ground. We have the evidence that many of them impacted bone, the signature that they impacted bone. We don't see what we see in the modern forensic context. We see, in your average autopsy or in skeletal remains that we look at with gunshot wounds, they show the effect of great energy, velocity, radiating fractures, beveling, concentric fracture patterns. We saw more simple fracture patterns here so far at Camden. So I've looked at some published studies that show the rapid deceleration of large caliber round balls, and the fact that they within under 100 yards are pretty ineffective in terms of accuracy. Velocity loss is extreme, and they bounce and roll on the ground. So the wounds we see in the men that we documented produce rather simple fractures. They did, embed on the bone and deform to the shape of the bone, and reflect the lower velocities and ballistics of the day. Where is the sharp force injury? Where are the bayonet wounds? Where are the cuttings marked by saber wounds, etc., sword wounds? We don't have it, so it is largely due to the degradation of the bone. The ends of the bones didn't preserve well. Those are the spongy, articular surfaces and trabecular bone of your skeleton. They didn't survive very well. So if there were limbs that were cut off, we don't see the cut marks. Also, the vertebrae and the ribs, where you bayonet someone, those bones are gone because they're thin and because of the effects of time, acidity of the soil, and just general preservation of the skeletons. I thought this was pretty telling. So Jim produced lots of 5-gallon buckets of soil, and the purpose for having these buckets from where every man was buried was to place some soil in the coffins with them, to be with them when they're reburied. So these were screened, they're free of any human remains and artifacts. I took them and dumped them where I had a hole in the yard to fill in, and this shows the color differential. Within one site, the Battle of Camden, the battleground, look at all the different colors of soil. So this explains the condition of some men versus the condition of others. So we have all the factors to consider of the soil type, the pH of the soil, whether it's acidic like your average red clay soil, sand versus clay, the drainages in the declivity areas, the depth of burial, lots of factors, of course the impact of agriculture and logging, all affected the survival of the skeletons. So some of our graves or one grave in particular was right in the line of where Farmer John drove his tractor for years and years. The two ruts went right over the grave, and you could see the compression of the individuals. So, the X-rays on the right are of the femur of the Highlander up top, showing you the preservation level. That almost looks like a modern X-ray of the sandy beach soil, just like beach sand, and then beneath it is one of our poorly preserved limb bones from one of the areas in more acidic red clays.
So at this point, we're going to go through each of these 7 graves and 14 individuals to give you their biological profiles and any sort of traumatic injury, or in the event of no skeletal traumatic injury, associations with musket balls or other artillery that Jim had helped us assign to each individual.
Here is our 71st Highlander. So he is one individual and given a Christian burial by his men with his hands kind of clasped near his pelvis. The deepest, I'd say the deepest of the burials. He was positioned supine, and we estimate he is male looking at all of the features of his skeleton. He was not particularly tall, and he was an adult. He did not have the signs of arthritis, degenerative change that we see in middle to later adults. So, and given his fairly average stature among the men, he nonetheless, we think, was biomechanically very well built, like a brick house. So this man would have been, his pelvis was wide, his femurs are just very robust. He reflects the muscle attachment sites of someone who has marched for thousands of miles and probably was selected for his imposing physique. So he was definitely an imposing figure on the battlefield. So for traumatic injury, we have shown the base of his skull, so right back here on the occipital bone. And this is one of our most convincing evidence of blunt force injury. So he was probably struck, could have been struck with the butt of a musket or bludgeoned with some other blunt force. Can't rule out projectile trauma, a musket ball, canister shot, but it does have the characteristics of a blunt force injury that was sustained at the time of death, and he was buried with those fractures in place, and his skull was incomplete, so parts of the skull were absent as well. We don't know if that's due to the fact that also that pine trees grew through parts of his skeleton. So, burial 4, as Doug described, we identified him in the process of taking an X-ray and receiving him in the laboratory and cleaning his remains as having Native American ancestry. This is based on the shovel-shaped characteristics of his incisors, which are mean Asian ancestry. In the context of our history, this means Native American ancestry in the New World. Lots of the other guys, we don't have an ancestry estimate because their faces were not preserved. They did not survive. So we can't measure the face and say this person was likely European American or African American. We don't know. We have assumptions about the battlefield and the demographics. Burial 4 was finished developing, 20 to 35. We estimate we may be able to refine these age estimates going forward with further study. And he was quite tall, 5'8", 5'10", and we had identified no artifacts with him and no evidence for injury.
Burial 9 consisted of 5 commingled U.S. Continental soldiers, and we have pictures here of the individuals laid out in our lab in the anatomical position, as well as the middle picture is in the field when we were trying to figure out, after they've been exposed, just who was who and where, as well as a great sketch done by archaeologist John Fisher to represent these people in the grave. They were all supine, so they were face up for the most part, or bodies up, sometimes faces turned in different ways. And again, commingled, arms across each other in some cases, multiple pelvises on top of each other. It really took Bill and I a long time with help of everybody on site to figure out how to begin exhuming them. Their age at death ranged from 16 to 45, and I'll go through each individual. So 9A and 9B, we've estimated both are biological males. 9A is an adult over the age of 20. Due to preservation, we were not able to get more precise than that. A younger individual between 5'2" and 5'5". And this individual had some trauma, which we have pictures of on the next slide, so I'll hold off on that. 9B, we mentioned that the burial 13 consisted of 3 teenagers. We didn't realize until we got back to the lab that this commingled grave of 5 people also contained 2 additional teenagers, so it upped our number in a surprising way. This individual, based upon his growth plates, was about 16 to 18 years of age, but rather tall, between 5'7" and 5'9", and had no evidence for any skeletal traumatic injury. This is a picture of his right upper arm, so the right humerus, and this is one of only about 4 individuals that we have what we call in situ trauma. So this musket ball was found right on this individual's humerus at the time of excavation. The image alongside it is an X-ray showing this association. Once the musket ball was picked up, it was heavily deformed and contoured to the surface of the bone. And underneath, as you can see in the X-ray quite well, a very likely perimortem fracture that occurred around the time of this individual's death. 2 additional individuals, also estimated to be males. Another teenager, this is our second one of the 5, between 16 and 19, 5'6" to 5'8" living stature. And several of these individuals had fractures of their thigh bones, their femurs, and we think that it's likely due to rough handling of the body post-mortem when these individuals were being put into the grave, and we don't see it as something that they endured during life. 9D was between 30 and 40 years old, between 5'4" and 5'7" in terms of his stature. And although we didn't have any evidence for skeletal traumatic injury, Jim located a musket ball near the right shoulder of this individual. And last but not least, the 5th individual in this burial, we were not able to determine an estimation for biological sex due to very poor preservation. We believe him to be between 20 to 45 years of age at the time of death, and between 5'4" and 5'7". And again, another individual that doesn't demonstrate any skeletal signs of injury, but had a heavily deformed musket ball from the abdominal region, which, if you recall Bill talking about the ribs as well as the vertebral column, that was not well preserved at all.
Burial 10 was one individual in a grave, and he was very shallow. The femur Jim mentioned, the knees would have been protruding from the ground. He was likely impacted by logging operations. He is supine, and he shows us some interesting features about the burial. So he's in a position of having his legs flexed like that, probably reflecting burial during decomposition, maybe a day or 2 later in the hot August sun. So he was likely a bloated, decomposing body that was buried. He may have been dug into by animals or disturbed by other means. He shows evidence of secondary burial. So up top in the sketch there, you can see a pile of what represents a pile of arm bones. They are stacked like Lincoln logs. They were placed back in the grave. The skull is oriented entirely wrong, and the mandible is somewhere else. So he was likely buried by a good Samaritan after the fact of his bones being disturbed. Historical accounts mention the bones littering the battlefield after the fact, those who did not get buried or those who were disturbed by feral hogs, dogs, etc. He is estimated to be male, and one of our older individuals, 40 to 50, maybe more, and we couldn't determine his stature because the long bones were not very intact. We couldn't measure a femur that had been plowed through or run over by logging trucks. No evidence for trauma, but he did have a buckshot recovered near him and a musket ball near his knee. And as I said, that he shows that sign of secondary burial. Burial 11 consisted of 2 individuals together, and they were about 36 centimeters deep on average, and they are both adults. 20 to 45 is our estimate so far, positioned supine in the grave. 11A, estimated male based on measuring the features of his bone, of his pelvis and skull, looking at his jaw and features of the skull. He is tall, somewhere 5'7" to 5'10", and had no evidence for any injury. 11B was one of those where we found with radiology up front, we found a metal projectile, lead projectile associated with his skull. It's buckshot, which is on his parietal bone. this may have been not even penetrated the skull. In autopsies, we often see shotgun pellets that have lost energy retained in the scalp of an individual. So he could have, caught some buckshot, and it's there. There was a defect underneath the buckshot, but lead is so heavy that when it gets compressed in soft bone, it's gonna, we didn't see fractures or anything. It was likely just in his scalp. And burial 12 is a Continental soldier who was a bit disturbed and missing a leg bone, one individual. He was supine, estimated to be male based on the features of his skull and long bones and pelvis. And 35 to 45 was our best estimate using certain methods. And he's our tallest individual, 5'10" to 6 feet tall. So we did not document any skeletal injury on him.
The final burial that we'll tell you all about tonight consists of 3 individuals, and this is a burial of the 3 teenagers. They were all supine, so face up, commingled, less complicated than the 5 people, but still a challenge in its ways. This, as you can see, our field sketch with our notes. And just like burial 10 shows signs of bloating, so early onset decomposition, and then buried shortly thereafter. And again, these are adolescents between 15 and 19 years of age. 13A was estimated to be a biological male between 17 and 19 years at death, with a stature of 5'5" to 5'8". And these are images of this individual's lower spine, his lumbar spine and the lower back. The first image on this side is in situ, so in the field. This is what we discovered, is a musket ball in this individual's spine, and then you see the radiographic image of the impact, and the one farthest this way is after we got done cleaning, and we're showing this association. You can see that it would have been quite complicated, and it could have easily been missed as an impact. Given the fragmented nature and the poor preservation of these remains, it was really critical for us to have seen this in the field itself. In addition to this gunshot wound in his lower spine, there was another musket ball recovered in the vicinity of his left elbow. The final 2 individuals in this grave, one was estimated as biological male, the other, again, we were unable to determine due to preservation. 13B was 17 to 19 years at death, and taller, 5'8" to 5'10". He also did not have any evidence for skeletal injury, but did have a musket ball recovered from his right elbow. So one on the left, the previous individual, and this guy in the right. Our final individual, 13C, is our youngest of the whole 14 individuals, with an estimation of about 15 to 18 years of age, based upon his growth plates and the lack of fusion in many places, including the upper arm, knees, upper thigh, and places located on the long bones. He may have had a possible perimortem trauma on his right parietal bone on the side of the skull.
Okay, so where are we going from here? So yesterday we put these soldiers in their coffins and sealed them, and today they were escorted from the lab to here. We have retained, with the permission and the interest of the directors of the project, DNA samples of molar teeth, certain other single-rooted teeth, and hard, preserved, compact bone from the base of the skull or the long bones. We are going to submit quality control samples to an ancient DNA lab to see if we can sequence DNA profiles complete enough to do ancestry, genetic genealogy studies, and link related individuals to these individuals who died that day. So that remains to be determined. We'll find that out in the coming months as to whether the DNA is too degraded to work with, or whether it is sequences and produces good profile. There are many interested parties who have ancestral ties to the Battle of Camden. Also, there remains the possibility of submitting to databases to compare and generate relationships based on the DNA, the genetics of these individuals. Dr. Delacova from USC is going to be conducting some isotopic studies, so looking at carbon, nitrogen, oxygen ratios, strontium in the bones, chemical indicators that can tell us information about the soldiers. Where were they born? Where did they grow up as their teeth were forming, as their bones were forming? The signatures of their environment, their drinking water, the geology can be preserved in these hard tissues of the body and tell you where they came from geographically, tell you about their diet, and other such, where they might have gone later in life, migration patterns. They're all using these types of bone chemistry studies. So she's also taken soil samples. We collected soil samples from each individual that may reflect the abdominal area, the contents of the parasite load that these individuals were carrying. We know they were not well. They had burdens of illness, dysentery, poor rations, and testing for that sort of thing could give us more information about their suffering and untimely death.
A big question that we got very early on in the project, and a big hope that we maintained throughout, was the possibility of facial reconstruction. But facial reconstruction involves having the bones of the face present, and the bones of the face are very fragile, thin bone, and unfortunately, I think it will come as no surprise that they did not preserve well. So that is something that we're sad about, but hold out hope in the future for advances in reconstruction for the parts of the face and mandible that did survive.
Yeah, we have had the pleasure of working with state law enforcement's forensic artists over the years in both for identification, generating leads for identifying individuals in modern times, but also in reconstructing the faces of 19th century individuals. We've done that a lot when remains are found. And it really requires the measurements of the eyes, the cheekbones, the zygomatics, and the things, as Maddie said, that don't survive very well in acidic soil. We took great efforts to preserve, conserve the skulls, digitize them. We have 3D renderings. So, and the future of the project might hold that some are better preserved. We shall see, with the ability to look at, approximate the face of one of the soldiers, but not yet. We'd like to thank everyone who supported and encouraged this project, to thank our boss, Coroner Rutherford, for allowing us to assist these agencies in this important historical project to protect and preserve and rebury these individuals. Everyone else listed here, and those are the coffins draped yesterday and in their first repose, I guess, at our external area, ready to be received and placed on the Humvees.
And that's all we have. Thank you so much.